The mansion glittered like a palace. Golden chandeliers rained light across marble floors. Polished so perfectly, they reflected every crystal and diamond worn by the wealthy guests. Laughter and clinking glasses echoed through the grand hall as the city's elite mingled, their designer suits and gowns shimmering with understated arrogance. In the background, unseen but essential, the staff moved quietly. Maids, servers, and attendants carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. They were shadows among giants, trained to be invisible. At the center of the glittering chaos sat him, the millionaire's son, dressed in a miniature tuxedo, his hair slicked back to mirror his father's. He strutted through the room as though the party existed for him alone. The boy couldn't have been more than 10, but the arrogance in his eyes belonged to someone far older. Guests laughed politely at his antics, indulging him because of who his father was. When he snatched a canapé from a silver tray and tossed it aside, no one dared scold him. When he interrupted conversations, tugging at expensive jewelry or mocking someone's shoes, people forced smiles. After all, his father was one of the richest men in the city. No one wanted to risk offense. The boy's arrogance reached its peak when he strutted toward the banquet table, his small hands reaching for a tall crystal glass filled with dark red wine. Gasps rippled among the nearest guests, but nobody moved to stop him. After all, who would dare correct the heir of the mansion? Nobody, except the maid. She had been stationed quietly near the banquet table, her posture disciplined, her eyes watchful. She wasn't new. She had worked in the house long enough to see the boy's temper tantrums, his cruel games, his smug smirks. But tonight, she had also been warned. Make sure the child doesn't embarrass the family in front of guests. So when his tiny fingers wrapped around the wine glass, she stepped forward swiftly, her voice calm yet firm. "Sir," she said softly, respectful but steady. "That isn't for you." The boy's head snapped toward her, his eyes narrowing. He wasn't used to being told no, certainly not by a maid. "I want it," he sneered. Her hand reached out gently to take the glass before he could lift it. But in that moment, his face twisted into something feral. With a sudden burst of childish rage, he sank his teeth into her hand. The sharp cry that followed sliced through the glittering hall like shattered glass. The maid dropped the glass just in time for it to be caught by another servant, but her other hand flew instinctively to her wrist. The boy's teeth had left an angry red imprint. Gasps erupted across the hall. Guests froze, champagne glasses halfway to their lips. The orchestra faltered, notes stumbling as if the music itself had recoiled. The millionaire father forced a laugh, his face stiff. "Children," he said loudly, as if that single word could explain away what everyone had just witnessed. Always spirited, but the murmurs had already begun. Some whispered in shock, others in judgment. The maid stood still, her eyes lowered in composure, despite the sting in her hand. She did not cry. She did not retaliate. She only breathed steadily, her silence louder than any protest. The boy, however, smirked. He had caused a scene, and he liked it. To him, the bite was a victory, another reminder that nobody could stop him. And then, seconds later, someone noticed. At first, it was just a startled murmur from a guest standing nearby. Then another voice chimed in, sharper, more insistent. All eyes shifted, not to the maid, but to the boy. Something was wrong. When he had bared his teeth to bite her, the room had caught a glimpse of something unusual. And now, under the bright chandelier light, it was undeniable. The boy's teeth weren't clean. They weren't the pearly white expected of a pampered millionaire's son. No, there was a stain, dark and unnatural, that clung to the enamel. The maid, still clutching her wrist, lifted her eyes to his face. Her expression changed. Not anger, not fear, but realization. And in that instant, The smirk slid from the boy's lips. Because his secret, carefully hidden by his father, protected by wealth and status, had just been exposed in front of everyone. The chandelier's light glittered over polished marble floors, casting sharp reflections into the eyes of the stunned guests. Whispers rippled through the air like cracks in glass. Every gaze was locked on the boy, on his teeth. The millionaire, standing at the head of the hall, sensed the tension building. His carefully manufactured smile wavered. He barked a laugh, sharp and forced, as though he could bend the truth to his will. "Children!" he repeated, louder this time. "They play, they test boundaries. It's all harmless." But his words fell flat. Guests were not laughing. They were staring, and in those silent stares, his empire of influence began to crumble. The boy's smirk faltered. He raised a hand to cover his mouth, but it was too late. The maid's injury, the visible bite mark, and most damning of all, the unnatural color staining his teeth, had already been seared into everyone's memory. The maid, still holding her wrist, straightened slowly. Her eyes flicked to the boy, then to the father. Calm, steady, almost defiant. She had lived too long under their roof to be surprised by cruelty. But tonight, the cruelty had revealed something darker. Those teeth. A woman in a silver gown whispered to her husband. "They look rotten," another guest supplied, his voice low, suspicious. "No," said a third, leaning forward, his tone carrying weight. "Not rotten, diseased." The word hung in the air like a curse. Diseased. The father's mask cracked. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, fear flickered in his eyes, before he buried it beneath another booming laugh. "Nonsense," he said. "My boy is perfectly healthy." But the crowd wasn't convinced. A doctor, one of the guests, stepped forward, his brow furrowed. He had noticed not only the discoloration, but the boy's skin, slightly pallid under the glow, the faint tremor in his hands. "Sir," the doctor said, his voice professional yet sharp, "your son should be seen. This is not normal." The boy recoiled, clutching his mouth with both hands. His arrogance melted, replaced by a flicker of panic. He had always believed himself untouchable, but the looks, the whispers, were suffocating. The maid took one small step back, allowing the scene to unfold. She knew better than to speak now. Her silence was her shield, and tonight it was the loudest truth in the room. The millionaire father's voice grew harsher, desperate. "Enough. This is a party, not a medical clinic. Enjoy yourselves. The entertainment will continue." But the guests weren't listening. They were piecing it together. The boy had always been hidden away, rarely brought to public events. When he appeared, it was brief, staged, rehearsed. The narrative had been that he was shy, that he preferred tutors over school. But tonight, when he lashed out, when he bit, the facade had cracked, and with that crack came the truth. The doctor's words pressed harder. "This looks congenital. I've seen cases like this, rare but serious. If untreated..." "Silence!" the father roared, his hand slamming onto the table, rattling crystal glasses. His voice, once commanding, now trembled with fury. "You will not discuss my family like animals on display." But the harder he shouted, the clearer it became. He was hiding something. The boy's eyes darted toward his father, wide, pleading. His little shoulders shook. For the first time, the mask of cruelty dropped, revealing a child, frightened, cornered, carrying a burden he did not choose. And then it came, like a lightning strike through the hall. A guest, older, powerful, not afraid to speak truth, rose from his chair. His voice cut through the murmurs. "This is what money buys, isn't it? Lies, cover-ups. You hide the boy because of his condition, and you let him treat servants like dogs to protect your image." But tonight, his teeth told the truth. The crowd's whispers swelled into outrage. The maid stood silently, But her heart pounded. For years she had endured the boy's cruelty, shielded by his father's wealth. But now the shield was cracking before her very eyes. The father's face flushed crimson. "Enough of this madness," he thundered. He pointed at the maid, his voice dripping venom. This is your doing. You provoked him, didn't you? You wanted to humiliate us." Every eye turned to her. For the first time that night, she spoke. Her voice was low, but every word was clear. "I only did my duty," she said. "I stopped him from drinking what was not his. What happened after was not my choice." It revealed itself. Her words were a blade of truth, slicing clean through the lies. The silence that followed was crushing. Guests looked at one another, their disgust no longer directed at her, but at the man who stood at the head of the hall, trembling with rage and fear. The boy shifted uneasily, his eyes wet, his secret no longer hidden. He bit her, because he thought himself untouchable. But in biting, he had bitten away his father's mask and exposed the one truth they could never bury. The millionaire, once untouchable himself, now stood stripped of dignity. His empire was built on control, but in one careless moment, his son had undone it all. And as the maid stood calmly in the center of the storm, the balance of power had shifted, because sometimes karma doesn't arrive with thunder or fire. Sometimes it arrives with a bite and the truth left behind. The aftermath of the shocking bite echoed long after the party should have moved on. The air was thick with tension, the clinking of glasses silenced, and the orchestra's instruments rested motionless in the corner, abandoned. The maid's words, measured, calm, undeniable, had cut deeper than any accusation. The guests, once dazzled by wealth and opulence, now whispered with suspicion, their gazes darting between the trembling boy and his enraged father. The illusion of perfection had shattered. The boy's father slammed his glass down on a nearby table, the crystal shattering in his grip. Red wine bled across the white cloth like a spreading wound. "Enough of this nonsense," he barked, his face blotched red with anger. "This is my house. My son owes no one an explanation." But the room didn't bend to his authority the way it once had. Guests, donors, and political allies who had always laughed at his jokes or bowed to his wealth now stood stiff, uneasy, and silent. Their eyes betrayed them. They weren't looking at the father anymore. They were fixed on the boy. The child had drawn back, hiding half behind his father's legs. But it was too late. The glimpse had been enough. His smirk was gone, his lips quivering, and the faint but unmistakable trace of blood still lingered on his teeth. The maid, still steady, though her hand throbbed, straightened her shoulders. Her voice was calm, but it carried like thunder through the tense hall. "Your guests saw it. You can try to silence me, but you cannot silence all of them." The murmurs grew louder, fragments floating through the air. "Disease. Cover up. Dangerous. Not right." One woman clutched her pearls. Another man whispered into his phone, no doubt already feeding the scandal to the press. The father's jaw tightened, his empire of power and control slipping through his hands in seconds. He reached for the boy's arm as if to shield him, but the boy flinched, not out of obedience, but out of fear. For the first time, he seemed small, cornered, and deeply aware that his secret had clawed its way into the open. The maid lowered her gaze for only a moment, then lifted it again, sharper now. "You told us all to serve with loyalty," she said, her voice low but firm. "But loyalty built on lies will always collapse." Gasps rippled through the crowd. No servant ever spoke so boldly, not in this house. But in that moment, she wasn't just a maid. She was the voice that the entire room had been waiting for, someone to say out loud what they had all seen. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and then, like cracks spreading through marble, The empire of wealth began to crumble.